Thank you for joining us on She's with the Band.
In this episode, Sue explores never-before-told stories of scandals, drunk driving, and mischievous late-night adventures with some of the biggest names in music history.
She's with the band. She's with the band.
This podcast is brought to you by debauchery Productions and may contain some content that some listeners might find offensive. Let's begin. We know the parties of these times must have been absolutely wild. What was it like going to the best clubs in London with some of the biggest celebrities in the world? And as young as you were, how did your family react to it?
I like to drink. A lot. A lot. God, on vodka and lime. I had to drink a lot of vodka and lime. It's so sweet and sickly. Oh, I used to pass out now and again. I drove back 6 sheets to the wind from Tramp one night, home, up over the heath, over the pond. I was flying. I think I'd nodded off at the wheel up Fitzjohn's Avenue. I remember, flew over the pond, home. Saturday night was about 4 a.m. And in those days, if I'd had a late night, I used to sleep to about 2 o'clock. My mother used to come and see if I was alive, if I croaked it in the middle of the night, if I was still breathing. Doorbell rang at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It was a policeman. I'd been clocked. Well, they didn't have, I don't know what they had. They didn't have cameras in those days, but a police car must have clocked me flying over there. Shocking. I used to, if I'd been really late, as I often was, in her car, well, you can understand, didn't know where I was, unless I had my 4 pennies with me. So with Brian sometimes, if I'd been round at his place, he lived in Chelsea, that was a long way, and he had people round, and I used to leave really late, and I would never phone. Oh, it was shocking. I used to go to a club in the 60s that was called the Casablanca. It was in West Hampstead. It was just down from the Finchley Road where Waitrose is now. And there was a guy there, Peter, that we didn't talk to each other all evening. It wasn't a romantic thing, but it was a bit of an attraction. He'd do his thing and just propping up the bar, and I'd be bopping away and everything. And then one night he said to me, "Do you want to go to the Ad-lib?" That was a really in club then. The Beatles were always there, the Stones. It was one of the clubs we used to go to. It was a great club in Leicester Place. You had to go up in a lift to it. It was upstairs. And he said, "Do you want to come with us?" Because he was always with a friend, comrade. So I said, "Oh, I've got to phone my mother." Because I couldn't do it to her anymore. It would have killed the woman. So I said, "Have you got any change for the phone?" 4 pennies. And they were big in those days, pennies. They were about the size of a 2p piece today. So he got me the 4p and off we went. And this was a weekly thing. He used to, at the end of the evening, we didn't say much to each other during the evening. He used to come over to me. He used to give me the 4 pennies. And I used to call my mother, say, "I won't be until very late. Don't worry about me." Because I didn't drive I didn't have the car. I went with him.
As he became a notable figure in the media after a certain scandal, can you tell us how you met John Riley and how that story unfolded?
So I had just started working at Boyfriend magazine. I must have started working for them, I would think, around, I don't know, maybe February, March of that year, 64. And we were going to go to Brighton for Whitsun weekend. So we booked I guess the equivalent of a B&B. I think they used to be called guest houses. And we went on the train. And we were staying for this weekend, bank holiday Monday, and then we had to be back at work on Tuesday. And I never saw these girls the whole weekend because I knew Johnny Gold, Johnny was just great. Johnny owned Tramp, but it wasn't Tramp then. Johnny had the Crazy Elephant and then it became Dolly's, but he didn't own them at the time. He ran them. And I knew Johnny was going to be in Brighton for that weekend. And he said, "Oh, we're all hanging out at the Metropole Hotel." So I thought, well, I don't need these appendages with me. I left them and rocked up at the Metropole Hotel. And there was this whole group of people sitting outside. There's Johnny, Billy Walker, who was a boxer. He was a very famous boxer. He didn't have a big innings, but for a while he was famous. Very pretty, blonde Billy. Somebody I knew from the rag trade in London there. And this small group of people. And there was this guy that I was introduced to called John Riley. He was a lot older than me, John Riley. He was a dentist. He was 33, I was 18. I wasn't 18 yet. I was going to be 18 the following week. This was just before my 18th birthday. And Penny Riley, but they didn't seem to be together. It was very weird. I didn't understand it. I was so naive in those days. I think she was an ex-model because I think I called her to a casting session a few years later. One and only casting session I did for Ridley Scott for a French bra. I think she fitted the mould. Oh, that's not meant to be a pun, actually. The brief. And there was this incredible attraction between John Riley and myself. And all we seemed to do, this whole group of people, there was never seemed to be nobody seemed to order any food. Everybody just drank a lot. But this was during the day, but in the evening you ate food. Well, I was with John Riley for this whole weekend. And he had a Volvo sports car, a silver Volvo sports car. I don't think they have them anymore. I think they only did them in the 60s. And oh my God, I had drunk so much, I can't tell you. Every day, I was just pissed. And yes, I ate, but there was not a lot of food intake. And I was with him the whole time. He was, he was obviously staying somewhere with his perhaps not so estranged wife at the time. I don't know. To this day, I don't know. I don't think they were together, but why was she there? I don't know. I really didn't have my thinking cap on then. So I was going back on the train with the girls on the Monday, the girls that I hadn't seen this whole weekend, and then back to work on Tuesday. I never stayed with him. I stayed in my B&B every night. He stayed with the about to be ex-wife, I would imagine. And he said, "Oh, stay down tonight. Why are you going back?" And I said, "Well, I've got to be at work tomorrow. I've got to go back." So he said, "Well, stay tonight and I'll drive you back in the morning. I've got to go back." So I thought, how's this going to work? I've got to phone my mother. She's not going to be happy about this. There was no suggestion of I stay with him. I didn't stay with him. I did not stay with him. So as far as I was concerned, this looked like an interesting relationship. I found him very attractive. He found me very attractive. So I called my mother. Obviously, I got 4 pennies for somewhere. She said, "Oh, what time are you due back?" I said, "I'm not coming home tonight." And she immediately, talk about knowing your own daughter, she said, "I don't care who you've met." She said, "You are coming home on the train with the girls." I went, "But he's really nice." And she said, "Well, what does he do?" So I said, "He's a dental surgeon." So she said, I swear to God, she said, "Well, I suppose that's okay if you come home tomorrow." And I thought, Mummy, I mean, that's really pretty awful in a way. She didn't know he was 33 years old, though. And that's when I started going out with John Riley. And the thing is, because he lived in town, he lived in Stratham Place, which is Hyde Park Square. And I lived in Hampstead. It wasn't easy to come and pick me up. And sometimes he'd be so late picking me up. And my mother used to make excuses for him. She goes, "Well, he's a busy guy, whatever. Responsible, got responsibilities." And sometimes he'd come and his hair would be wet, like he'd just got out of the shower. Well, which he obviously had just got out of the shower. And then one night we went to a party of a friend of mine near where I lived. And he was there was no way that he could drive home. He was so pissed. And so he stayed at my house in my sister's bedroom. Well, because my mother was there. He stayed in I don't know where my sister was, in her single bed. He slept in my sister's single bed. Anyway, John and I were an item for a while, but it was probably about 6 months. I took him to the first Beatles premiere. Hard Day's Night was the first one. John was my date for that night. I don't know where we went after. Anyway, we used to eat at the Angus Steakhouse in Hyde Park Square. It was around the corner to a restaurant in Notting Hill, which wasn't called then Notting Hill. It was bohemian, but not called Jasper's. We went to a lot of places. I mean, he was seriously, and I had no idea that he was two-timing me. He was two-timing me with an editor of a very well-known magazine at the time. And it only came to light at my girlfriend's 21st. It was awful. I'm not even going to tell you what happened. It was just awful what he did to me. I thought he'd turned up to see me because I said, are you coming to Jenny's 21st with me? And he said, I don't think I can. I think he said something about his mother was in from Canada. He used to say his mother lived in Canada. I believed every word that he said. I'm sure he said it was his mother. And he said, if I can make it, I'll come. And then halfway through the party, it was a massive party with a marquee in the garden and everything. When the dancing had started, I see him walking across the room I thought, oh, he did make it after all. But as he's walking towards me, he kind of goes that way to this, she wasn't the editor of this very famous magazine at the time, but she was a journalist. And there was a resemblance in the fact that we both had red hair and big tits. That was the only resemblance. She was older than me. Well, apparently he'd been two-timing her with me. Can you imagine? So that was it as far as I was concerned. I just left it. And then, you're not going to believe, this is quite incredible. 5 years later, to the day of that weekend in Brighton, Jenny, whose 21st it was, so she and then her husband bought a house very close to there in Southwick Place, and they invited me over for supper this night. They'd just moved in, and I'd come from work, wherever I was working at the time, because I used to drive to work. And I thought, I must take them a bottle of champagne. And I tried to go into an off-licence round the Edgware Road, and whatever. I thought, I know, I'll go into the pub, the King. It's so famous, this pub on the corner of Hyde Park Square. The name's gone right out of my head. But anyway, I'm having a senior moment. And I thought, I know, I can go into the pub and they can sell me a bottle of champagne. And who do you think's standing at the bar? 5 years later, is John Riley. Standing at the bar. So he obviously still lived in Stratham Place. So chat, whatever. It was a bank holiday weekend, 5 years to the day. And he said, what are you doing this weekend? This guy was so attractive. He looked like Peter Finch, the actor Peter Finch. So much so, they used to get mistaken for one another and got introduced to one another because of it. They were so alike. So you can imagine how attractive he was, because Peter Finch was gorgeous, wasn't he? So he said, well, do you fancy doing something this weekend? Such an idiot, me. So I went, okay. So I went to Jenny and Frank for supper that night, and then the weekend approached, and whatever we did, I can remember, did the usual things, go out for dinner, whatever. But he used to disappear in the afternoon, something to do with work on a bank holiday weekend, a dentist. I just believed whatever he told me. I was so gullible. I also found out many years later that he had married Cindy, Mother Bunny, in 1965, and that she and John had joined the Beatles in their trip to the Bahamas. They had a holiday in the Bahamas. And I featured the photographs of the Beatles in the Bahamas in one of the issues of the Beatles Monthly. Anyway, the Beatles always used to talk about this guy. They used to call him Dr. Feelgood, or I'm not sure. Actually, I think Dr. Feelgood might have been somebody else in the States. John Riley was referred to as the wicked dentist. And he never had a mother in Canada. It was Cindy. She was Canadian. Mother Bunny. Because I also called, I was evil with that casting session for Ridley. I called her in as well as wife number one. But Mother Bunny couldn't make it. So I had wife number one, Penny Riley. And then there was a book out. I can't remember whose book it was, on the Beatles. And it was the chapter in which they were introduced to LSD. And there was this whole thing that I think there was John and Cynthia, and I'm not sure if it was, I think Patty and George were talking about this night that they didn't know that they were slipped this LSD, and the person that gave it to them is named John Riley. So when he used to disappear, he just used to lie through everything was a lie. And my mother made excuses. You know, he's 33 years old, you're 18 years old, he's a man of the world, he's got things to take care of, and that's who it was. I mean, and after they found out what he'd done, he was not regarded very highly by them.
When that story came out about Dr. Feelgood, what year was he supplying those drugs? Did you know him back then?
Well, yes, I suppose so. I was with him in 64, I was with him. So I'm not sure if this happened after. I don't know. I'd have to read the bit in the Beatles saying, I don't know if it was them. I don't know if they went to him. He was their dentist. I'm not sure if he he could have been, because he did quite a few starry people. Oh, he was just, talk about playing me. And I fell for it hook, line and sinker. Incredible.
What were the restaurants and clubs that people in the music business frequented?
I used to go to the Garrick Theatre Club, and it was quite a very sophisticated place. In fact, I went with Brian Jones one night. Decca had had a big record party, and Brian came up to me. I remember I was there with Maureen. It's funny how you remember certain things about certain evenings. I'd gone with Maureen that night, or I'd met Maureen there. And I remember I can remember this table full of food, this massive, massive table, practically the length of the room. It must have been at least 20 feet, 5 feet long, this table, with all this food. I can remember standing there, stuffing myself, because you never knew when you were going to eat. You were always plied with so much drink. It's like, eat when you can, you know. Because I didn't want to pass out and disgrace myself, which I could have on many an occasion if I didn't get some food inside me at some point. Because no one ever said, would you like to go out for dinner? Well, very rarely. And Brian said to me, I'm going out for dinner with some American friends. There was this couple. They were very sophisticated. They may have been in their 30s, which was certainly double my age. And then we went to, after, I remember, going to either, whichever it was, Dolly's or, because it wasn't Tramp then, they moved up a venue. Because the original one that Johnny had, which was the first one, which was the Crazy Elephant, or Dolly's, whichever was first, was the Old Society. It was a nightclub where the gangsters used to go. Not only gangsters, but I think it was run by gangsters. And people like Ruth Ellis used to hang out. All the people that had connections. And we went there. They used to eat at nice places. We used to go to the Hungry Horse on the Fulham Road, because that was very near where Brian lived. If I was over there and he said, do you fancy going over to the Hungry Horse? Oh, it was great, the Hungry Horse. It was a Sunday night place. The Hungry Horse's menu was just up my street. It was steak and kidney pie and bangers and mash. It was fabulous. There were lots of restaurants on the Hollywood Road and the Ifield Road that people used to go to. That area was just incredibly up and coming then for restaurants. They had really good restaurants around then. And San Lorenzo's, of course. And then the clubs that they liked to go to, the Scotch of St. James's, always. The Bag of Nails, the Cromwellian. on the Cromwell Road, the Revolution, which was in Bruton Place off Berkeley Square, and there was the Speakeasy. The Speakeasy. It was on Great Portland Street. That was another hangout. But the very sophisticated people, not just your regular band from up north, group from up north, but the really successful ones that mixed with the establishment. We'd go to the Ad-Lib, we'd go to Tramp, obviously, and Dolly's Crazy Elephant. There was the Saddle Room, Helen Corday and the Saddle Room. Sibylla's was another one. I remember being there and sitting with a group of people, and George was there. I remember Sibylla Edmondson, who it was named after, very pretty model. Sibylla was going out with Jamie Robertson at the time, who they were all very friendly with. These weren't music people, but they were very in people in this very cool crowd that the Stones and the Beatles mixed with when they started mixing with other people like Robert Fraser, Antiques and Christopher Gibb. And so those were the sophisticated places that you went to where they mixed with not the hoi polloi, they mixed with better class of person.
Princess Margaret?
Oh, I never saw Princess. Oh, I'm sure she went to Annabelle's. Annabelle's wasn't my scene. Tramp, I loved Tramp. It was a lot of ducking and diving at Tramp because of you had the 3 rooms there. You sat in the foyer. There were sofas when you came down the stairs. Then there was the dining room, and then there was the actual disco, which was very small actually. Really, you sat in banquettes around the disco. You could never have a conversation because the music was so loud. But you did at dinner when you were in dinner. But she never went to the music places, I don't think. I never saw her anywhere.
I'm going to show you some photographs that I've seen, and I would love for you to explain the stories behind them. There's this one of you and Ringo.
Oh, yes, I've got several photographs from then. So that group of pictures was the Melody Maker Poll Awards, which was at the Post Office Tower. The Post Office Tower, it was a novelty. It hadn't been open that long. I'm not sure when it opened, but we certainly hadn't. I'd never been up there before. I don't think any of us had been up there before. I suppose the Beatles must have got an award. Otherwise, why? And Tom Jones, I think in one photograph I've got, he's holding a gold disc under his arm or something. I've got a whole group of photographs from then. Dusty, there's photographs with Dusty and them. Not all the Beatles. It was just Ringo and Paul were there, I think. Yeah, otherwise the others would have been in the photographs. Tom Jones. He and I were having a bit of a laugh there.
Did you know him well?
No. But you see people around at the studios at Top of the Pops, and you always have a chat. And at the studios, there's always into makeup, on set in 5 seconds, whatever. Yes, that was the Melody Maker. That was the only Melody Maker Poll Awards I can remember going to. The big event every year was the NME Poll Concert. That was sensational. That was at Wembley Arena. That was massive, massive. The backstage area there, it was like this enormous barn. I mean, it was always cold. Well, I don't know I can't even remember what time of year it was, to tell you the honest truth. And you name them, they were there. They were there. Because just like the Brits, some of them performed. Not all the people that won awards performed, but there were performances and the awards as well. And it was a great place to meet people. If you're a journalist, you were backstage anyway, not in the dressing rooms. Well, unless you worked for NME. So when I worked for them, obviously, as I was only there for that period of time, I only was at one when I worked for them. Otherwise, I'd just go anyway. But you were in this big barn, like you would be at an outdoor festival. It was so massive. There'd be a bar and probably nothing to eat in, and nobody ever ate in those days. They just drank. They were incredible. So that was the Melody Maker Poll Awards. I don't think anyone else did them, the other music papers, because Melody Maker was big and NME was big as well. So no one else did an awards thing because they weren't big enough. And then you had all the magazines with all the journalists, all the teeny bopper magazines like Rave and Jackie and all those sort of things. That's why Maureen appropriately, where I think she picked Rave to go and work there because of its name. She went from boyfriend to rave. She was already at rave at boyfriend. She didn't have to go and work for rave. Petticoat, that was another one. They were different. They were for the girls, whereas the music papers, that's what the boys used to.
Do you still meet people nowadays that know about the articles you wrote in the magazines you worked for?
My next door neighbour, the other day, a new next door neighbour, I don't know how it came up. I must have said this to him when he moved in last year. I don't see him very often because he's got a place in the country. This is his sort of pied-à-terre. He's doing sculpting classes, and I always have his spare key. So we were talking out front the other day, and he said to me something about, didn't you used to do something in the music business? And I said, yes. He said, well, what did you do? And I said, I was a journalist. He said, and I suppose you're going to tell me you work for something like the Melody Maker or NME. Well, I went, well, as it so happens, I did. He said, you didn't. So he's obviously the same age as me, similar age to me, who could be up a couple of years, down a couple of years. He said, you didn't. So he said, oh, he said, I used to read that avidly. So I said, so when are you talking about? He could have read it years after. I have no idea. So he said, around 1964. I said, that's when I wrote. He said, you didn't. He said, would you mind? I thought, oh, God, what's he going to? Would you mind? Would it be all right if I asked you to have dinner with me? I'd love to hear all about it. I went, really? He said, those were fabulous times. That was the music paper that I read back then. So it's only when you hear little things like that they want to hear about it. I guess when you're not in the business, I guess it was very special.
In the next episode of She's with the Band, we will explore how Sue broke into the entertainment industry as a teenager and was suddenly surrounded by the world's greatest music icons. How she appeared on one of the most popular TV shows of the time, meeting the Beatles, early ghostwriting for the Stones, and so much more.
She's with the band.